For, well, basically all of human history, we've been debating the existence of God. Now, we're all pretty familiar with the arguments for a divine creator, but there's an equally powerful, equally old philosophical tradition arguing against the whole idea. So in this explainer, we're going to dive into 4 of the most significant arguments against God's existence, and of course, the classic counterarguments for each. The goal here isn't to pick a side, but to really get our heads around the logic and the intense curiosity driving both sides of this massive question.
All right, we're going to start with what is, for so many people, the most powerful and personal challenge to their faith. This is a question that goes way beyond abstract logic. It hits you right in the gut, right at the heart of our shared human experience. This is the famous problem of evil. You see, the problem of suffering is so potent because it's not just some philosophical puzzle you think about in a classroom. It comes from a deep, emotional, and very real response to the pain and tragedy we all see in the world. I mean, someone famously scrawled on a concentration camp wall, "If God exists, he will have to beg for my forgiveness." That tells you everything about the power of this argument.
So what this slide does is take that really raw emotional problem and frame it in some pretty cold, hard logic. It's often called the paradox of Epicurus, after the ancient Greek philosopher. And he laid it out so clearly. Look, if God is all-powerful, he can stop evil. If he's all-knowing, he's definitely aware of it. And if he's perfectly good, he wants to stop it. So, if a being with all 3 of these qualities really exists, why is evil still here? The philosopher William Rowe really drives this home with this absolutely brutal thought experiment. This isn't about suffering that, teaches a lesson or builds character. This is about what he calls gratuitous suffering, pain that seems to serve no purpose whatsoever. The existence of even one single case of truly pointless agony seems to fly in the face of a loving, all-powerful creator. Now, the common response from theologians is to split evil into 2 different categories, like you see here. First, there's moral evil. The argument is that this is the price we pay for genuine free will. For our choices to mean anything, we have to have the real option to choose badly. But that defense has a much harder time with natural evil. Why would a good God design a world with tsunamis, with cancer, or with animals that have to tear each other apart just to survive? None of that is caused by human choice. And this is where we get this really brilliant analogy from the philosopher Richard Swinburne. He suggests that for our actions to matter at all, we need a stable, predictable reality, one that's governed by natural laws, even if those laws can sometimes lead to awful tragedy. A world where God is constantly stepping in to stop bad things from happening would be like playing a video game on easy mode. Sure, it's comfortable, but things like courage or real compassion, they become completely meaningless.
So even with these really smart and sophisticated defenses, the raw, emotional, and logical power of this argument is just immense. That's why our source gives this the verdict of convincing. Now, it might not disprove some distant, impersonal first-cause creator, but it poses a huge challenge to the idea of a personal, all-good God. And that matters, because it forces believers to wrestle with how they can reconcile their faith with the harsh reality of a world that is so often filled with pain. All right, let's switch gears a bit. The next set of arguments moves on from God's goodness and starts to poke at the very logic of his power. These arguments don't really question God's morality, but whether the attributes we give him, like being all-powerful, are even logically possible in the first place.
And here it is, the big one, the paradox of the stone. It's a classic logical trap, and it's designed to show that the whole concept of omnipotence, being all-powerful, basically contradicts itself. As you can see, it's a catch-22. No matter how you answer the question, it seems to lead you to the same conclusion. An all-powerful being just can't exist.
But the classic counterargument here is all about redefining what we mean by all-powerful. Philosophers like Thomas Aquinas said, hold on, omnipotence doesn't mean the ability to do things that are logically impossible. I mean, creating a stone an omnipotent being can't lift is a contradiction in terms. It's like asking God to draw a square circle. It's just a meaningless jumble of words. It's not a real task. So being unable to do it doesn't actually limit your power. Okay, but things get a lot more complicated when you bring God's all-knowing nature into the mix. Think about it. If God knows the future with 100% certainty, is he truly free to change it? The classic defense from thinkers like Boethius is pretty mind-bending. They argue that God exists outside of our timeline. He doesn't foresee the future like we do. Instead, he sees all of time, past, present, and future, all at once. So his knowledge doesn't lock in his future choices, because for him, it's all just happening in one eternal now.
So, what's the verdict on these logical puzzles? Well, while they are a fantastic mental gymnastics, the source rates them as good, but not exactly devastating. Why? Because theistic philosophy has literally spent centuries building up these counterarguments, and they're considered pretty solid. The paradoxes tend to highlight confusion in our language about God more than an actual contradiction in God himself. And that's a really important distinction. It suggests the problem might be with our limited human brains, not with the idea itself. Okay, we've tackled morality, we've tackled logic. Now let's get a little more existential. These next arguments aren't really about paradoxes. They're about our place in the universe, and whether the cosmos we see around us really looks like it was made by a personal God who's interested in us. This one is called the argument from divine hiddenness, and honestly the logic is super straightforward. If God is a loving being who wants a relationship with us, then why does he seem to be hiding? The fact that there are sincere, rational people out there who honestly search for evidence of God but find absolutely nothing, well, that seems to contradict the very nature of a God who wants to be found.
Yeah, and this slide really gets to the emotional heart of it, right? If God is a loving father, like so many religions claim, then this deep cosmic silence in the face of a child who's genuinely searching, that starts to feel less like a test of faith and more like, well, a form of abandonment.
Next up, let's just talk about scale. Sheer, mind-blowing scale. The number you see here, 2 trillion, is our best guess for the number of galaxies in the observable universe. Not stars, not planets, entire galaxies. It's a number so huge our brains can't really process it, and it forces us to ask some pretty big questions about how important we really are. So, you see a number like that, and what are you supposed to think? Well, one perspective is that it just screams cosmic indifference. We are a tiny, tiny speck in an unbelievably vast and hostile void. It kind of suggests our existence is just a fluke, not the whole point of the universe. But the counterargument is fascinating. It claims that all this vastness was actually necessary for us to even be here. It took billions of years, in countless galaxies, to cook up all the heavy elements and create the stable conditions needed for a life-bearing planet like ours to finally form. So for that first argument about God's silence, the verdict is convincing. It doesn't really disprove an impersonal creator, like a force of nature, but it creates this deep, nagging tension for any belief that says God is personal, loving, and wants a relationship. It's a huge hurdle, because if a relationship is the goal, then silence feels like a direct contradiction of that goal. And what about the sheer size of the cosmos? The verdict here is good. It's a powerful emotional challenge to the idea that humans are the center of the universe. But the counterargument that all this scale was a necessary precondition for us is also pretty strong. What it definitely does, though, is force a major shift in perspective. It moves humanity from the center stage of creation to maybe just a tiny part in a much, much bigger cosmic story. All right, our final argument. And this one is maybe the most fundamental of them all. It takes things one step further. It doesn't just question God's attributes, it questions whether we even need the idea of God in the first place. It all boils down to this one question. What if the universe doesn't need an outside explanation? There's a principle called Occam's razor, which basically says we shouldn't make our explanations more complicated than they need to be. So if the cosmos can be explained by its own internal laws and processes, then adding a creator on top of that becomes kind of a redundant step. The universe could just be self-sufficient. You see, this idea flies directly in the face of the classic first cause argument for God. That argument, on the left, is simple. The universe had a beginning, so it must have a cause. But look at the right. Modern cosmology offers this really startling alternative. Models like the quantum fluctuation hypothesis suggest that, according to the laws of physics, a universe could literally pop into existence out of a quantum vacuum, a type of nothing that isn't really nothing, without any need for a supernatural nudge. And that's why this one gets the strongest verdict of all: irrefutable. Now, it's really important to understand what that means. It does not mean this view is proven to be true. It means that the idea of a self-sufficient universe is a complete, coherent, and scientifically plausible worldview that just doesn't require a creator. As an alternative explanation for everything, it can't really be disproven by philosophy or theology. And that makes it a uniquely powerful challenge. It basically changes the game. The question is no longer just, does God exist, but is God even necessary for the explanation? So where does that leave us? After digging into the problem of evil, logical paradoxes, divine hiddenness, and cosmic self-sufficiency, we're left with this final thought. Are these arguments definitive knockout proofs against God? Or, Do they, along with all their counter-arguments, just show us the absolute limits of our own human reason when we try to tackle the biggest questions of all? That is definitely something to think about.